The International Game Developers Association, more commonly referred to as the IGDA, is the largest non-profit organization in the world to serve individuals who create games. The association represents a global network of collaborative projects and communities, comprised of individuals from all fields of game development, from programmers and producers to writers, artists, QA, and localization. Fred and Chris from the OPN team had the chance to speak to its executive director, Kate Edwards. The following is an interview about her career path with gaming, and of course, her current role at and vision for the IGDA.
I'm a huge Star Wars geek, and
Nice.
I wanted to work on something Star Wars, and so I had the artistic skill. I went and did industrial design in college because I found out that most of the conceptual artists at Lucasfilm, that's what they did. And I got tired of professors telling me what to draw. I was very obstinate. They're like, we're going to draw a car this week, and I'm like, does it have to have wheels? And they're like, of course it does. And it was kind of disappointing. So on a total whim, I just switched my major to geography and cartography because I've always loved maps. I've loved travel and just felt that that's a subject that's always been, close to my heart. So, and I could still use my skills, my artistic skills with cartography. And so that's what I did. I got my bachelor's and master's in geography, got a certificate in cartography, worked for a year as a cartographer, went to grad school in Seattle. That's what brought me to the Seattle area, and started work on, that's when I did my master's. And I was starting on my PhD when Microsoft needed a cartographer to work on a card encyclopedia way back when. And so I ended up going over there for what I thought was going to be like a 6-month contract because I'm a starving grad student. I need the money. And I ended up working at Microsoft for 13 years.
13 years.
That's cool.
Oh wow.
And so
It all started-
That's I mean that's
did.
that's a big window. What can you tell us after 13 years at Microsoft?
Well, basically what happened, I went in as a cartographer on Encarta, and then I became the cartography lead, and then I eventually created a team after a few years that I called geopolitical strategy. And so the role of that team was to protect the company against political and cultural risks in the content that they were pushing out through Office and Windows and anything that Microsoft created. And so the very first game I worked on was Flight Sim, because at the time that's the only game that Microsoft had. Once my game studio got started and the Xbox project and all of that stuff, all of what they were working on fell under my responsibility as well. And so basically between 95 and 05 when I left, I ended up working on virtually every first-party game Microsoft made. So the Halos and Fables and Age of Empires and you name it, I did something with it. And me being a huge video game geek and also the culture geek, it was just the absolute perfect kind of job. I absolutely loved it. And so what I would do is basically advise them on things that might be potentially sensitive in different markets. So for example, they have a character that looks very close to an existing culture, but it's not supposed to be that culture. So I will advise them, maybe you should tweak this or change that. Things like hand gestures, I worked on like all the Dance Central games over the last few years because hand gestures and body language can be sensitive in different markets.
Oh, yeah.
So when you have a dancing game, symbology usage, like even fantasy games where they have like clan banners in the game, sometimes the artist will borrow a symbol from an existing culture, or they'll see a symbol they think is cool but then it ends up being something really problematic. So there's a huge range of issues, including the use of history. We had a lot of problems with Age of Empires in different markets because in some cases
I gotta ask. You must have. Was a lot of your work focused on the Asian market?
a lot Asia and Middle East actually.
Middle East as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
But
interesting.
not exclusively. I mean, there were issues all over the world. Latin America, Europe, you name it, there was usually something that came up. Pacific Islands, lots of different issues that would spring up. But it tended to be a lot of East Asia issues, Korea in particular. And a lot of it is because the government's there to be pretty protective of their culture and not afraid to ban games and ban products for something that might be problematic from their perspective. And so basically my goal was all I wanted to do was make sure that whatever content being created by developers or whoever, I just wanted to make sure it could go as far and wide as possible so everyone could enjoy it. And that was my job.
And Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, so you were at Microsoft. How did you end up at IGDA from Microsoft?
So when I left Microsoft in 2005, I consciously decided I wanted to focus more on games than anything, because that's where my heart is. That's what I love. And so I knew that I knew what it was. I knew it was active, and I knew it was a good way to get integrated into the game industry. And because it represents such a wide cross section of people from the industry, and I said that's what I'll do. So I joined the IGDA. A few years later, 2007, I created the localization special interest group in the IGDA because there wasn't one.
What's that?
IGDA has many different special interest groups, like for art, for writing, for production, all these different areas. The localization SIG is focused on people who work in game localization, and they're the ones who adapt the content for international markets, whether it's language translation or other issues like what I do.
So very connected to what you were doing at Microsoft.
Yeah, it is. I mean, most of the localization work is based on the language translation, which is something I do because I kind of do anything in translation. But those were the people to hang out with at events like GDC and E3 and stuff like that. So I said, hey, group for us, and led that group and provide the chapter. And by late 2012, the board of directors approached me and asked if I'd be interested in interviewing for the executive director position.
Wow.
And
how did you receive that? Was it
know,
it must have been. It's the biggest association in the world when it comes to representing game developers. So I imagine such a proposal must have been pretty intimidating.
To some degree, but I had my own feelings about where the IGD was at the time. I felt that there were things the org could be doing a lot better, and I had voiced my frustrations to some people around me. But I was still
like what? If we can ask you to share at least some of the less controversial details.
Well, it's not really controversial. I mean, it's just the fact that every executive director has their own style. And my thing that I'm really big on is advocacy, and I want to see action. I want to see change. I want to see issues that are affecting the industry get better or go away, depending on what the issue is. And I didn't see that the org was being particularly effective in that realm. It was being in other ways, like growing the community and doing some great stuff. So I just felt I could do more. And so that's basically it. I decided to, when they asked me, of course I was very flattered, but I immediately said yes, sure, I'll do the interview. And the reason I said yes, frankly, was because I thought it'd be fun. I hadn't had to do an interview for over 20 years. So I'm like, I got nothing to lose. Why not do it? So
I think you're the first person who refers to an interview as fun. Obviously, I work in Washington, D.C., and they're the worst.
Well, I was looking forward to kind of voicing my concerns and just kind of sharing my ideas with the board of directors, or at least the committee. And I did. I was very blunt and I was very straightforward with them. And I went back and did another interview, and then they offered me the position and said, would you like to do it? And, I had to think really hard because I've had my consulting, which I really enjoy. And I do it. I still, to this day, I do consulting on the side. It was a condition of becoming the executive director because I don't want that part of my career to completely go away. So that's kind of my hobby. The IGA is my day job and my consulting is my hobby now. And
they tie into one another anyways, I assume, because your role at the IGDA must be involved in networking. Networking must be such a big aspect of the job.
Absolutely. And on a global scale too. So having that cultural and geopolitical knowledge that I've been carrying around for decades really, really helps in this job. It really does, and including in discussing with governments about different issues around the game industry, and not only that, but also just with individual developers in different countries, and it's great. I find it really, really useful. So yeah.
I was going to say that just brings up a question. How multinational is the IGDA? I mean, obviously you talked a lot about different countries you work with, and with localization, I imagine you touch all kinds of people from all over the world. But do you actually know how many countries are formally have members that are part of the IGDA?
I think the last time I actually tracked by country, see, I always think about by chapter. We have about 125 chapters around the world.
Okay.
And country representation, I think it was somewhere around 65, something like that.
That's really cool.
We just had, and it's exciting to see because we're seeing chapters open in places like Bangladesh last year, and we have one in Tehran.
Yeah.
So a lot of emerging markets are very, very interested in they've got chapters now, so it's great.
In Eastern Europe as well, I'm assuming you're very active because it's quite a booming scene over there.
It's growing, yes. I mean, we don't have a lot throughout Eastern Europe, but I mean, Europe in general, it tends to be a little less active for us. Well, it depends on where. Like in Scandinavia, we're very active. IGDA Finland is just this incredibly active community. It's amazing. And Estonia as well has been very active. Georgia has been active, so it's been great to see. And some of the other.
We're gonna get a little bit later on into the chapter, so I don't want to rush into it and skip some important steps, because I know there's people listening and people who will listen who don't know what the IGDA does or what the IGDA is to begin with. So Chris, maybe we want to start with that.
Yeah, well, that was actually the next question I was going to go to. Is I'm particularly interested in who are the pioneers behind the initiative, and what caused them to come together and form the IGDA.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So basically back around in the early 90s is when a group of people led by Ernest Adams, who is the founder of the IGDA, they came together and they recognized that, look, we need something for game developers so that they can be represented better, so that their concerns can be voiced. A lot of it was in reaction to some of the activity of Jack Thompson at the time, who was in the U.S. government and the Congress. He was one of the most vocal anti-video game Congress people ever. He has since been discredited quite a bit, disbarred, and all these other things happened to him. You could read about him on Wikipedia. But
is he a Democrat or a Republican?
I think he was a Republican, but don't quote me on that.
Okay,
I don't know.
Sure. We'll check it out.
Yeah. But anyway, he essentially was leading this effort in the U.S. government to ban video games and to really, have this negative perception of what games are and what they can do. And so, and that obviously affects game developers. It affects their livelihood. It affects their ability to be creative. And so that's why the IGDA was formed in response to that. And, in a lot of ways, I would say that it was probably overdue by a little bit, because pretty much every single major profession has a professional association. And so the founders, Ernest and others, were looking at something like the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, as a model for what the IGDA could be. And the ACM has been around for a very long time. It's, essentially it's the organization that if you are a programmer or you do software, anything along those lines, not necessarily game related, then you're likely a member of the ACM. I think most people on the game side recognize the ACM from SIGGRAPH, which is the special interest group on computer graphics within the ACM. So SIGGRAPH, of course, is a huge event that happens every year. And so that, I think most people who are in the creative space, whether it's animation or video games, they know what SIGGRAPH is, even if they don't know what the ACM is. But SIGGRAPH is a part of ACM. And so that's why the IGDA was formed, was to be a better voice, to be an association for game developers, so that not only can they be better advocates as a group, but also just foster professional development like professional associations do, making sure that people understand that, it's great where you are in your career, but you can do better. You can get better at what you do. You can talk to other people. You can network with other developers and learn from what they're doing and mentor people or be a mentee or whatever the case may be. And that was really kind of the kernel of what got the IGDA started.
So on one end, it really is about the need for advocacy, almost advocacy on the Hill, just like any trade association in the US. And then on the other end, it's also tools and means and networks for game developers and any type of young industry professional trying to better himself at his job.
Yeah, sort of fostering a community where you can meet people who you can learn from and who can possibly learn from you. It's interesting to me that this kind of thing hadn't happened actually sooner. Given that video game industry's obviously been around for a very long time. I'm glad you folks are out there doing that. Is really what I'm saying. Well, that also kind of segues nicely. We were talking about how violence was obviously an issue that a lot of politicians took up as being why video games should be banned or they should be censored. I even know it comes from the left and the right too. I know Hillary Clinton was out there in the 90s screaming about video games in a bunch of comments she's since reneged on. And I've read a series of studies that I'm sure many of you out there have also read that consistently show violence in video games. There's no correlation between violence and video games. So that issue aside, what are some of the other issues that you guys have had to deal with that are sort of similarly political, but not, basically you would need someone like the IGDA to sort of lobby against them?
Yeah, well, there's been a whole host of issues. I mean, and to be clear, I think the violence issue isn't completely gone at this point, but it's certainly not the kind of focal point that it was, say a decade ago. There's still people in Congress who still believe video games are a source of violence in our society.
I gotta stop you right there, Kate, because I think it's still a controversial matter. It's not as clear cut within the industry. It's not so much the industry against some conservative politician. Even the industry itself on the subject is divided. Wouldn't you say so?
It depends. I wouldn't say it's divided too much on that subject. I mean, at least on the violence issue.
What do you make of a game, for example, that releases like Hatred, and then on the other end, a big company like Valve taking it off of its shelves, and that leading to the controversy it led with some people saying, and I've heard we've talked to a lot of gamers, developers on a daily basis, and it's not that clear cut. Some people believe Hatred should not have been on the shelves of Steam software and should have been pulled down immediately, that they did the right things. Others things, no, games, it's up to parents. It's a little bit of a similar issue that you find in just national politics about gun control.
The flag too.
I actually see it differently. It's actually not analogous to the violence issue. What it is a free speech issue.
Right.
That's the core of the arguments being put across for like why a game like Hatred should not be taken down from Steam. It's not whether or not the game fosters violence so much, although sure there's some people who probably think that. The issue is really whether or not we have free speech in games as an artistic medium. And my position on that is quite clear, and the IGDA has been clear on it as well, is that freedom of speech, we fought with the whole case, with the Schwarzenegger case in the last few years, when we finally got the Supreme Court ruling a few years ago stating that games are free speech, which in the US is a huge victory for video game developers and for video game consumers as well. So basically it means that, you can create anything you want, and because games are an artistic medium just like books and film and television and everything else. However, there's a big however to this, or but, or whatever, how you want to say it. The issue really at hand, and when I give talks about the culturalization work that I do, I often finish with this point, because I explain to people, because I go through a whole bunch of examples of like different cultural faux pas and errors that different companies have made where they offended a government or they got their game banned and all that other stuff. But I'll caution people and say, look at it this way though. Everything I just talked about matters when you want to sell the game, when you want to actually make revenue off of this creative art form. That's when you are subject to market forces. That means you are subject to forces like Steam, because it is a marketplace. It's not just a free speech center, it's a marketplace. It's a store, is essentially what it is. And so stores
you don't have to sell your game on Steam.
Right. Well, Steam also has its own rights to free speech too. So arguably what they put on there is their own speech.
Exactly. Just like Apple has their own control, their own rating system for what goes in the Apple Store, which is different from the ESRB and the IARC system being used by the Android store and by so many other countries that have different rating systems. So to me, the issue is quite simple and clear cut. It's like if you are an artistic game developer, you're creating your game for the sake of art. You should be allowed to create anything you want. And yes, it may be dramatically offensive, but that's on you. That's the statement you're putting out there as a creative person. Just like someone could go and make an offensive film, they can write an offensive book. That's on them. They may get a lot of public backlash for it, but still, that's on them. But the issue is that if you want to sell, and you're going to sell through these marketplaces like Steam, or whether it's a brick and mortar store like Walmart, if you've got a packaged good, it's like you have to expect that these gateways like Valve and Walmart and others, they will say something about it because they don't want to sell that kind of content. Now, that doesn't mean the content's not artistic, and that doesn't necessarily slam free speech. It's like, well, no, you're not letting me sell my game. It's like, well, no, because your game has people running around chopping people's heads off in the most graphic way possible, and a lot of people find that kind of gross and offensive. So no, we don't want.
And it's interesting to me too, though, if a game is broken and they pull that from the market, you don't hear a lot of argument, But
right.
if a game is suddenly very controversial and it's pulled from the market, well, that's suddenly perhaps a free speech issue, which I find to be an interesting distinction.
It is, yeah, and I think part of the problem too is that, especially from the government perspective, we still have a lot of people in government who view games as toys, not as as an artistic medium. And so usually, if they hear the public saying this game offends me or this game is, causing violence or whatever, they will treat it like a toy, meaning that they will come down with hard regulations and saying this game has to be banned, it has to be regulated, the industry has to be regulated, because it's kind of analogous to, let's say you make a frisbee or flying disc, and every time you throw it, it comes back and hits you hard in the head. And that's not as designed. We don't want it to do that. We want it to fly straight. But every time it hits you in the head, the government would come and just say, well, that's defective. That has to be fixed.
So how long do you think it will take? How long do you think it will take, and what will it take for the industry, the gaming industry, to be considered and regarded at the same level as the movie industry, for example, as Hollywood?
Well, I think we're very fast approaching it. It depends on what level you look at it. I mean, economically, we far surpassed Hollywood in music a while ago. So the game industry is a vast economic force. I think part of the problem is that the public doesn't see it that way, because games tend not to get the same level of media coverage as movies, and that's the way it is. I mean, we have to remember movies have been around for over 100 years.
Yeah.
And the whole mechanism, the media mechanism, the having movie stars and studios and premieres and all that kind of stuff has been around
for depth around it too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, and
as little by little, as a form of entertainment, I'd say we're starting to dethrone the movie industry.
Yeah. Absolutely, especially as we have, younger generations who are not growing up with the movie-going experience quite as much, although I know the industry is fighting very hard to do that. I mean, I still enjoy going to movies. I went and saw Ant-Man in IMAX 3D this weekend, and I loved it. So, and I loved that experience, but at the same time, we are seeing games become more of a force in terms of media attention and kind of capturing the mind share of the public. And so I think for a lot of these issues to go away, frankly, we are seeing more and more recognition at different kind of official levels, even within the government, that games are an art form that needs to be respected. I mean, certainly the Supreme Court decision a few years ago was a very key step in that direction, at least for the United States. I know there's still many challenges around the world on this point, but frankly, the best we're going to hope for is that this is a generational issue, because within about 15 to 20 years, every single person sitting in Congress will have grown up with a video game console.
Do you think the spread of mobile games is helping us make that progress?
Absolutely, because I think games, whether or not, I know we get into all these arguments among gamers about hardcore versus phone, mobile,
especially
people.
PC gamers.
We don't need to bring up any of that. So.
Yeah, but I know that the argument's out there. I've gotten into that argument with some people. I mean, to me, I tend to be more, universal about it. A gamer is a gamer. It's like you play a game, then you're a gamer. I don't really care what you play on or or anything like that. But the fact that mobile devices are out there and they've got so many games on them, and and the power of most most smartphones today are more powerful than, like, say, a PS2 in terms of graphic capabilities. So you got so many people. I mean, a lot of people don't know, for example, that in the U.S., the demographic of 30 to 40-something women playing games is greater than teen males.
Really? I'm surprised by that too, actually.
Yeah.
I knew it was underestimated.
Kinds of games on her computer. They're usually Bejeweled and Bookworm, small Yahoo Flash apps, but she spends hours a week doing it.
Exactly. And so that's the reality we live in now, and that's the world we live in, where a lot of people play mobile games, a lot of people who are traditionally not in the demographic. When you see the ESA's numbers, where the average age of a game player in the US is around, I think they said it's 36 now, and again, one of the fastest growing demographics is over 50. So,
can we talk about gender issues and the sexist card that has plagued our industry? Obviously, it's a lot that I imagine you would agree is a lot less controversial and divided than violence in games, and yet it's something that continues to plague our industry. We see those incidents on a regular basis, and then the whole community is set ablaze for the right reasons. How come do you think what's the root cause here? Like, how come we're still facing those sexist tendencies within our industry, and how do we get past that?
Well, I think there's a lot we could talk about on that issue alone, but let me try and simplify it from my perspective, even though it's not a simple issue. Talking on the industry side as opposed to the consumer side first. So on the industry side, I mean, we have to recognize the fact that game development came out of the IT space, and the IT space, going back to the 50s and 60s, was extremely male dominated. Even though a lot of the video games we know and love today, a lot of those were designed by women, or they had their hands in the design process, but where we got to now is essentially we saw, like, during the 80s, actually a lot of women in the IT and game space, and a lot of the early games, like in the Infocom days and all of that kind of stuff, a lot of women were involved in the industry. But then we just saw this kind of tailing off, and over the last couple of decades or so, we've seen we're getting to the point we are now, where according to our IGDA survey, we're at about 20% women working in the industry. Now, in general, that tends to be a little bit better than the broader IT industry, which means the whole IT industry and the game industry has work to do in terms of increasing
non-technical roles or technical only. Like, is that marketing and sales and all that too?
It's everything.
Yeah. Okay.
It's everything. So yeah, if you look strictly at technical roles like programmers, the percentage plummets from 20% down to more like 3 to 5%.
That's sad.
It is sad, and there's a lot of issues at play. I mean, one is the historical issue, the other is a kind of a socio-demographic issue, where we see that a lot of schools today are doing STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math programs for the kids, and girls at that age in elementary school should exhibit tremendous interest in these subjects and a great deal of aptitude for it. But we see usually when they get to about junior high, puberty, social pressure, all of these kinds of things set in, and their interest just plummets and goes off the cliff.
It's a social stigma.
If there is a stigma about being a nerd, about being a geek, that's slowly changing, but we have seen that over the last couple decades, and so that's kind of led us to where we are now, where for boys that stigma's not really there as much.
It's almost expected that boys will play.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool, at least in our circle.
Right, exactly. And so it's just one of these things where I'm working as part of an initiative. I mean, and I think Intel, when they had their announcement at CES earlier this year about their diversity and technology initiative, in which they're spending over $300 million to basically move the needle on this issue, because they recognize that this has to change. We've been dealing with this for too long, and the tech sector in general needs to have better diversity representation, especially like in the game industry. As I've said many times in different talks, like, we've got 20% of game developers are women, whereas we have almost 50% of game consumers are women. And
Mm.
so it'd be kind of nice to see a little bit more parity in there, so that the people creating games actually better represent those who are actually playing the games. And
I mean,
that's
there's also,
really,
I can understand that from a professional standpoint, the hiring process and getting people to follow a career trajectory, women like men. But there's another problem, I think, here, and that's just the gaming community in itself. People playing games tending to be a little bit sexist, and we
oh
see it
yeah.
every day. You know, we see it every day within gaming communities. Let's face the facts. Our community is not really waving the banner high as far as advocating for women's rights in the industry. And
Right.
how do we solve that?
Well, that's the other side of the issue is when you look on the consumer side, on the gameplay issue with, I mean, that opens up a huge issue around community management and
Yeah,
about, how do we better monitor communities when you've got, small teams within a company, doing their community management, and but then you've got, thousands or millions of users that are playing your game. And that kind of scale is very difficult to achieve. And, when we look at, there's great things coming out of Riot, for example. If you look at some of the
yeah,
stuff they've been doing with League of Legends has been brilliant, where they've done a variety of things, not only the system where they reward people for reporting trolls and reporting behavior, and give them in-game items and stuff to help make sure that the community maintains a more inclusive environment. That kind of stuff is great, rather than just outright ban hammer all the time, because people have to learn. You have to teach them behaviors that are actually going to be positive. And I just read an article over the weekend where they also employed some level of AI to basically determine what people consider to be harassment and what people consider to be negative comments within their community, and they use the AI to better understand how they can tweak the system and actually improve it more and more, so that and so they've actually seen a huge drop in reports of harassment behavior, huge drop in complaints, and a lot of that's credit just to the fact that they were willing to focus on that issue as a company and really think about it hard, about what can we do to ensure that anyone who comes to play our game is going to have a positive experience. And so I think a lot more companies in this industry need to think really hard about that and learn from Riot and other companies who've taken those steps, and just try and do a much better job in how they build their communities. And obviously part of the problem here is that we've got the whole anonymity issue, which we know we're all familiar with, the
yeah.
online environments and trolling and all that
It's
kind
the
of stuff.
internet.
Well,
Yeah,
sometimes I wonder if that's part of the problem is, the world wasn't quite prepared for the internet, and they were presented with this great communication network that allowed you to be anonymous. And so
yeah,
somehow this prevailing attitude that seemed, in my opinion, crept out of the 90s, because I was a child of the 90s, and that's when I started using the internet the most, was that because you were anonymous, you could say whatever you wanted. And
Yep.
that the internet took on that identity. And that is why we now face a lot of these problems that if I think people had just been nicer at the beginning with better moderating tools, we wouldn't be
Yeah.
in this position today.
Right, I agree. And in the old days, like 1980s and prior, when
Yeah.
some of us were using teletype machines to chat with each other, I mean, it was a much nicer environment. And part of that is because we weren't anonymous. We actually kind of knew who each other was, or it was pretty easy to find out. Hey, this person has an email address at this university. And
Right.
that kept people on better behavior, frankly.
And it's interesting too, because I remember the very first time I encountered, a troll or trolling when I was young. I was probably 8 or 9, and it was on Battle.net, which I think is probably one of the most ridiculous communities in the 90s I'd ever seen, and probably have ever seen since, maybe with the exception of being 4chan. But what I did find too is that sometimes when you actually confronted individuals, if they were saying, particularly it was racism. Back then, racism was the worst thing.
Yep.
And if you confronted, occasionally when you confronted people about it, they actually some of them would apologize, or at least they would stop, because they realized someone was listening. A lot of these people were throwing hate into the air, expecting no one to listen, which I
Yeah.
thought was the most interesting thing. They always hate for hate's sake, just to hear themselves chat. And then when you would say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that, they would go, oh, some of them wouldn't listen, of course, but others, some would.
Right.
And so maybe actually, I think this kind of leads into my next question about the upcoming leadership forum. Is the IGDA and the leadership forums, are you guys the people that go online and confront these haters and say, look, maybe you shouldn't do this, and if you're going to, we're going to create a community that prevents you?
Well, we don't. I mean, so the leadership summit that we're doing next, no, 2 months. It's still July.
You forget
So
time.
yeah. So the leadership. Well, the leadership forums are something that we did from 2007 and 2011, and those came about where there was we've got huge conferences in the game industry with the Game Developers Conference, obviously, and E3 and other events like that. We have some niche ones today, like the mobile conference, like Mobile Gaming Forum, and ones of that nature. And I think back at the time, the IGDA leadership felt that one of the things that was missing is teaching developers how to be better leaders at what they do, not just in a management style perspective, but also just like we're focusing on at the leadership summit is it doesn't matter what position you have in the company. You can have thought leadership. You can evoke leadership in what you do and how you do what you do. Yes, there's a certain component of that that's focused on the executive level, like how do you lead a company, how do you lead people, but there's also things like what can an artist who's like second year in the industry, what can they do to show that they are being a better leader? And they can do that from a lot of different ways. Best practices about how they do their art, for example, or they try not to use stereotypes when they're creating their characters and things of that nature. Now, to your other point though about being a force of monitoring the community, we just don't have the scale for that. I mean, and frankly,
Not so much the force, more like the face. You know what I mean? Obviously, you don't have enough members to control the entire internet, but
no,
I don't think
like me has to be able to point and say, people should be like them.
Yeah. Well, what we are trying to do and what we can do is actually we come up with best practices. We come up with policies or ideas or strategies that people can employ in their companies that are having these issues. Because again, we are focused primarily on the industry side, and so this is the kind of thing where like we gave Riot Games at GDC this year, the IGDA awarded the company with a leadership award because of the system that they've employed to make such great improvements to community management. And so we want to highlight that. We want to show people, shine a spotlight. We can show a spotlight on companies that are doing good things, show what these best practices are, try and help others understand what those are, and basically be a nexus for ideas to kind of get those out there and try and make the industry improve in this particular area. But ultimately, it's like every one of those communities is owned by that company, and so it has to be a decision made by the company. But we as an organization can certainly help add pressure to the company and say, hey, this would be a great thing for the image of the industry if you guys could clean this up.
I'm personally interested to find out about your member base and how it's evolved over time. You look at an industry that's dramatically, radically shifting and shaping itself and revolutionizing itself on a monthly basis. This is the fastest growing industry out there right now and the most successful one. So that means a massive influx of young people trying to get into the scene and trying to make a career out of it. So there's no more just a couple major studios dominating the market, but first of all, there's a ton of major studios dominating the market, and on top of that, there's the rise of the indie scene that is creating a space for anybody who wants to team up with a couple guys, and those teams from our experience tend to grow organically and just kind of happen naturally, just people between friends playing with the Unity engine and then suddenly producing a great game that it becomes a blockbuster and then sells as Minecraft and the guy makes $1 billion. I mean, of course, that's the dream story, but it's motivating all these young people who are trying to get in the industry and say, well, I'm obviously passionate about gaming, because who isn't nowadays? And on top of that, if I can just get my foot in the door, there's a shot for me to make it. So you must have seen over the past couple years, you don't even need to go that far back in time, the IGDA must have seen its membership base dramatically shift. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, we have seen quite a shift because, the IGDA was created at a time where it was primarily consoles. That was the world we lived in, console and PC. And, I know the PC gaming has had its own, people have thought that it's dead or it's waning or whatever. I mean, obviously it's not. I mean, I don't think that's an issue at this point, although some would argue with me about that. But I mean, it's been a pretty pervasive platform for decades now, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. But we have seen a shift, no doubt about it, in membership from people who are more focused on like the console development side, AAA gaming, all that kind of stuff, to whereas now when we did like our last developer survey, which we do every year in the IGDA, we had 48% of respondents saying that they identify themselves as being independent. Now, whether or not they are truly an indie developer, as we tend to think of indie developers, like with their own little effort, or sometimes independent can mean that they're just like a freelance artist who just happens to be based at Sony at the moment. So we kind of left that open to interpretation. Yeah. But nonetheless, that is a dramatically huge number. That's almost half of respondents said that they identify as independent, and so we're seeing this dramatic shift. There's no doubt about it that a lot of people I know who were in the console world who have taken those skills and have gone off and created their own little independent studio, some with great success, some with not so much success, and then they kind of ended up going back to their AAA world, which is fine. They decided to try it, it didn't work out, they went back, but the point is that they still love games. They didn't leave the industry, they just kind of shifted where they put their effort.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing, though, that I think is really interesting and is really going to continue to change this industry over the next decade or so is what I would call the democratization of game development. Yeah, and so if we believe that games are an art form, which I do and pretty much everyone I know in this industry believes that, then we have to be keenly aware of what happens with art forms. Because if you think of any major art form, writing, filmmaking, painting, drawing, all of these things, where are they today? Well, obviously you have professionals who do those things, but at the same time, you can go to almost any store and get a drawing pad and pencils or paint brushes and paint, and you can just start doing it. And I think we're getting to this point because so many of the game development tools are now free or they're cheap. You've got a free version of Unity, you've got Unreal Engine, you've got all this other stuff that's free out there.
Cinema never was that cheap. It still isn't that cheap.
Well, it isn't. But even with cinema, though, I mean, I knew some of my friends growing up in Southern California were film students, and they went out and bought their own cameras, video cameras and whatnot, and they could still make a decent film for a small amount of money. Now but I'll come back to that in a second. So we're seeing a lot of people who are people aspiring to be, well, there's two types of people. We've got the people who actually want to be game developers as a career, and they're using the indie route to get in there, which I think is great because the tools are there and it gives them the chance to experiment and just start creating things and kind of see where their skills lie and where the creative sense is. And then you've got people, which is kind of more this democratization comment, you've got people now who game development is not their primary passion, nor is it their primary job, and yet they like to do it. And so someone, for example, might be an accountant at like a bank or something, and then they go home at night and they use Unity and create games.
That sounds a lot like us, Chris.
Yeah, so, we're
I made an Oculus game with my friend, actually. Yeah, it's not very good. But
but you did it, though, and that's the thing.
Doesn't work.
Well, yeah, we're seeing a lot of people do that now, and so that kind of expands this definition of who is really a game developer. I mean, I think you're always going to have the professionals, and the IGDA is always going to look first to those who are professionally doing this activity. But then you've got all these other people, I guess you could, for lack of a better term, call them a hobbyist, who they like to make games on the side.
Kate, I'm not surprised about that. I'm not surprised that once the tools become so easily accessible, young guys who want to get into the industry starts playing with them. What I am surprised about is the audience that they have, how well received these games are, and how many gamers nowadays are more excited about the next indie than they are about the next AAA release. That the supply is there. it's not surprising, but that the audience really comes to surround them and support them. Look at Kickstarter, just the fundings. We just did an interview with Crawfall. We just did an interview with Berserkers. These are guys that just come out of, they come out of big studios. They've got all the experience, the knowledge, the artistic talent to carry out a game. But the moment they come together, guys, between 5 and 10 guys, they can raise $2-3 million and build a product that can compete against what's being done with multi-million dollars budget. So it's an exciting time, and I think it's twice as exciting to see that the gaming community, we're just talking about the negative aspects of the gaming community when it comes to sexism and other nasty stuff like that, but when it comes to supporting the indie movement, which again in cinema, you're not going to see the indie scene in cinema. You're going to find some support, but it's still a struggling industry in comparison to Hollywood. I think you're playing with different mechanics in the gaming industry. Right. You have a real scene for indie developers to actually produce products that could be internationally known.
Well, the problem that both have, though, both meaning, like, say, an indie film developer versus an indie game developer, they both have the exact same problem, which is getting noticed. And that is the number one problem that I've seen with indies, is that they've got the passion, and many of them have the skill. There's no question about that, because they're artists and they're just using the tools that they can use so well. The problem is that what do you do when you've got your finished product? And
we've seen that a lot ourselves firsthand.
Right. And so, I mean, like in the IGDA, we've done a lot of... We do webinars we do webinars usually weekly, depending if we have the speakers. But like we've done a lot of webinars focused at indie developers, like how do you market with little or no budget, how do you get funding, all of that kind of stuff. And one of the other things besides the issue of being discovered or getting yourself out there somehow, the other issue that I've seen a lot with indies these days is the lack of business skills. So like they go through all the emotions and they create this great title and everything, but then they have no clue about payroll. They don't know.
They're artists.
Taxes
well, that's true with so many startups too. I feel like all the .coms you see coming up and down, all the little app companies, a lot of them struggle with that ability to run a business. They've got brilliant ideas.
Because would you say that, I think there's two issues at hand here, and indirectly leads to two questions to you, Kate. The first one is, would you say that even though there's tons of means to fund your project, from Kickstarter, crowdfunding, small publishers that are willing to support you and get your game out there, at the same time, there's a lot of groundwork to be done when it comes to networking. I feel like networking, if you have friends that share your passion and you can build a team with, then all the power to you. But a lonely artist with all the talent in the world is, and most great talents tend to be lonely souls.
Absolutely.
It's still very hard to build a team, to find a network. Facebook just ain't gonna cut it.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's actually one of the cornerstone reasons why the IGDA exists, because a lot of people join the IGDA because they want to be part of the community. They want to join the local chapter. They want to be part of a special interest group, not just to, improve their skills, or not just to network, but also to network for the purpose of getting their game noticed, or building their marketing avenues. I mean, building their funding possibilities, all of that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, we know there's always going to be the people who prefer to create by themselves, off in a corner, doing what they do. And some people do that really, really well. And then all of a sudden, after like 3 years, they come out with this game and everyone's just totally blown away by it. But most people don't work like that. That's more of a rarity. You don't have the lone artist, the kind of the savant who can do all of those things.
It's kind of like the Super Meat Boy guy story, or on that indie game.
You're right. Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly, which is a great story. I mean, so it's like not everyone is like that. Most people, they're going to struggle a bit. They need to educate themselves. They need to learn how to run a business. They need to learn all of these, learn the ropes of all this stuff. And, the better prepared they are, then great. So I know there's a lot of effort on the industry side in the IGDA and elsewhere to empower indie developers with the knowledge that they need. a lot of times you'll find, like here in Washington, we've got something called the Washington Interactive Network, which is a quasi-government coalition that basically one of the things that they do is they help indie developers understand things like this. How do you get government funding? How do you get help with taxes?
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff they do is free. It's just indies need to avail themselves of it.
Yeah, and let's get into the weeds. How does that? Because obviously the IGDA has national events of importance that brings international players to the same space, just like a Gamescom. But more locally, you were telling me yesterday, I believe you have 125 chapters, if
Yes.
I'm not mistaken. How does that work at the local level? How do you help game developers network and connect with the community around them locally?
So basically, a lot of the IGD's daily activity is done through our chapters. That's where a lot of the activity is, because frankly, us in the HQ, we're a small staff. We basically keep things moving along, but the chapters are really where the IGDA's representation happens. And so pretty much every chapter has at least a monthly event that they do. They have a monthly meetup. Sometimes it's just a social gathering.
It's very active.
Yeah, and so but a lot of times they'll do lectures. So like here in Seattle, we have a great game development community, a lot of people to pull from. So sometimes we'll have one time we had we had an environmental artist from Halo 4 come and give a talk about their work on Halo 4, and they happened to do it in the theater at Bungie because that's where we held our meeting. And
That's
it was
awesome.
great. It's really informative, and people they learn something about it, but then they also have a chance to network with each other, and and it's great because most every game developer I know, regardless of their level, even high level executives that people know, for them it's mainly a scheduling issue, but most everyone I know, they are so open about what they do. They are so willing to talk and to share. And that's one of the things I absolutely love in the game development community, and especially in the indie community, because I'll go to like the Seattle Indies meetup, for example, and I just love the spirit of collaboration that's there. It's not cutthroat competition. They all realize, we all want to be successful, and so they all kind of help each other out. I've seen cases where like someone is showing their game up on the screen and it's not finished. They're just kind of showing the latest build, and somebody will suggest, hey, I've got some code that might fix that issue right there. And it's great. I love seeing that, and I love that collaborative spirit that happens, and I've seen it across the game industry. And we do that at the chapter level. We encourage people to get together. A lot of people find mentors at the chapter level. They just find advice. They find co-workers for their project. And sometimes we have chapters collaborate with one another around the world. Like we had IGDA Nigeria and IGDA Japan was doing something together.
That's amazing.
Years ago.
That's really cool.
That's very cool.
And that's one of the advantages of why people join the IGDA and why they form chapters, is because they want to be part of that global network.
Nice. Well, you've been great. We've really enjoyed this interview. I don't want to take up a ton more of your time. Before I ask my last question, I'll give Fred one more shot if he wants to ask any other questions.
I have a kind of a tricky question that is very not clear cut at all. But Steam Valve has very much opened the space. They created a space for developers to sell their product right by the side of big titles, and it's not uncommon every day to open Steam, and God knows how many gamers get on Steam and open the software every day and see a big banner for the next big game coming out, and immediately right after, the small indie that's just the product of 4 or 5 guys in St. Petersburg, Russia, and is actually building a fan cult right around it. So it's great exposure, and at the same time it's a complete it doesn't take long for you to feel it's a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a mess in the sense that any game seems to be able to either get greenlit or actually straight up on Steam page. So my question is obvious. Do you feel like Steam Valve might have gone too far into making that space open to any game coming out? Because as a regretful consequence, that's gonna make the small indie with a small game be surrounded by all of this mediocrity, to be blunt. So do you think that we went too far into just the democratization of game development?
I don't know. I mean, the way I see it is that Steam, I still view Steam as quite an experiment. And I think Valve, in my perception, sees it the same way. I mean, they continue to tweak how things work with the green light system and all that kind of stuff that's involved with it. I think it's fascinating to see what they're doing and to follow kind of the mechanics of what they're doing. I kind of agree. I like the fact that virtually anything can get that level of exposure. It's kind of cool, but at the same time, it's like, but I don't know the mechanics around how that gets exactly how that happens.
It seems very loosely.
Yeah. So
from some of the stuff we play.
Right. So I mean, that's basically a quality control issue, perhaps on the Valve side, or in the community side as well. I mean, it just depends. But I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of a state of mind with the whole Steam thing. Is that I'm kind of sitting back watching how it evolves and how they continue to tweak it. I think they're still learning, but I mean, I think the world's a better place with Steam.
Oh yeah, so do I, by the way. Yeah, absolutely.
It's easier, that's for sure.
That's it for me, Chris.
Okay,
go ahead.
Great. Well, so just as a nice closer, I was just very curious to know, because this is a podcast about games, particularly PC games. I'd like to know what your favorite video game is, and that can be a non-PC game. And then after that, I'd like to know what your favorite PC gaming memory is. I'm going to leave you with those two questions.
Good ones, Chris.
Oh, that's hard.
There's the hardest ones at the end.
It is hard. So many. Yeah, I mean, it just. Well, I'm just going to rattle off some of my favorite games that I play.
Please.
I mean, I don't have a ton of time to play these days. I've got a 32 Warlock in Destiny.
Yes.
And
that's awesome.
I haven't played for a few weeks because I've been traveling. But so, I still play Halo multiplayer. I'm a total Halo geek. I worked on 3 of the titles. I know
Nice.
it's old school, but I love it.
It's not. I just went to the Windows store and they had a huge banner right on the wall for Halo. Halo is still very much with us.
Yeah, so I mean, I love it. I mean, I really do. I'm giddy about Halo 5, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, what else do? I play Bejeweled Blitz. I play Avengers Alliance on Facebook. I still play that. A lot of my friends dropped off, but
Technically a PC game too.
Yeah. I used to play my favorite arcade game of all time, because I'm old enough. I mean, I remember when Pong showed up in the stores. That's how old I am. But was the Atari Star Wars, the Vector one. I love that game.
Classic.
That was my best arcade game. Some of my favorite PC experience. I think one of my most favorite PC games was Dark Forces.
Yeah.
I really loved that game. I don't know why in particular I loved that game. I mean, I'm besides being a Star Wars nut, but I just really did. I remember having so much fun playing that game, and yeah, that was probably one of my favorites. I used to play a lot of Mac-based stuff. The Ultimas, the whole Ultima series, I absolutely love. I think Ultima 3 was I don't know. Ultima 2, 3, and 4 were my favorites. A lot of that's because also the social component, the friends I was with at the time, and just good times staying up all night playing Ultima 4 because you couldn't save your progress and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that still happens on some specific indies.
Yeah, but it does. But yeah, I would say if I was to pick a couple genres, I mean, I definitely am an FPS person. I like shooters. I also like RPGs. Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls series, I absolutely love. Fallout, I'm really looking forward to Fallout 4. Yeah, so those kinds of games I really like. I just don't have much time to play them.
That's the sorrow.
I would say one of my favorite IPs ever, though, is Assassin's Creed, and the reason I like it so much is because I have this interest in geography and history and everything. I love, especially in Assassin's Creed 2, I thought they did such a fantastic job.
It's amazing.
of melding the real history with fiction, and doing a passive learning through the game. When you walk into a certain piazza, and the little thing pops up and tells you this is Piazza della whatever, and I'm like, I loved it. I just thought it was.
So I'm originally from Boston, so the Assassin's Creed, I think it was the third one that took place in the Revolutionary War America.
Yeah.
It was cool because they
strike the chord.
Did a pretty good job recreating parts of Boston. It was fun to just run up buildings I've actually been in.
And I'm from I'm from Paris, so
there you go.
I think they're serving everyone at this table.
Just about every.
Yeah, so I really like it for that.
That's great. That was a great roundup too, and that was such a nice whirlwind of PC gaming too. So thank you for sharing that with us. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, Kate, we can't thank you enough for doing this. Very excited about just being connected to the IGDA in some shape or form. Our mission here at OP Noobs is, in a way, I think ties in nicely to the work that you do at a much smaller scale, of course. But we're trying to get we're community built, so it's PC gaming by PC gamers, and we're trying to create a space for gamers who want more out of their hobby, not just to play games but want to write about them, get experience with the pen, get experience with the microphone, and get to talk to indie developers about what it takes to make games. Anything that's kind of got a creative outlet, we're trying to create a big tent for it. So hopefully we'll keep working hard and staying in touch with the IGDA. Again, thank you for taking the time. And until next time, we hope to bring you one day on one of our roundtable events that we host with several indies. We focus on a specific theme, and we kind of dig in and get both sides of the debates.
Great. Well, thank you very much again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kate, and to everybody else, have a good day.